listening to the HumanCare podcast, part of the Invisible, Not Broken network. I'm your host, Eva Minkoff. On this show, I have candid conversations about chronic illness with both patients and practitioners. In other words, humans like you and me. I'm also the founder of Wellacopia, the matching site for healthcare relationships. Visit wellacopia.com to connect with your ideal medical or wellness practitioners. Today's episode features Sneha Dave, a powerhouse advocate, journalist, and community leader who at 22 is already more accomplished and influential than almost any adult I've ever met. On top of it all, she has ulcerative colitis. Sneha's resume of accomplishments, big and small, is impressive to say the least. But more importantly, everything she puts her mind to is geared towards the greater good. Here are just a select few I'd like to mention. Sneha is a recent graduate of Indiana University, double majoring in journalism and a major she created, chronic illness advocacy. She is the executive director of multiple nonprofit organizations, one of which is the Health Advocacy Summit. The summits are designed to be a safe space for teens with chronic conditions to meet and discuss what strategies have worked and what ones have failed them. So no doctors, nurses, or pharmaceutical reps are allowed to participate. Sneha also created a special program of the Health Advocacy Summit, the Crohn's and Colitis Young Adults Network, which facilitates a paid fellowship program for young adults with inflammatory bowel diseases. And lastly, at least for this episode, Sneha writes for various media outlets such as US News and World Report, Yahoo News, and Huffington Post. And she has been selected twice as an academic fellow for the Association of Healthcare Journalists. Oh, and she's worked in research at Harvard. No biggie. I think that's enough for now. As for the episode itself, in part one, we talk about graduating during COVID, Sneha's story along with barriers from cultural insensitivities, and how our healthcare system wasn't designed for young adults. Before we get started, a reminder that all conversations and health claims on this podcast are based on individual experiences and expertise. Everyone has their own personal and professional truths and should be treated as such. Okay, let's get started.
This is my finals week, so it's been like
Oh, wow.
a little stressful.
Oh, yeah. We should not have scheduled that last week in particular. Wow, I'm glad that we...
I am very bad. Yeah, that's like one of my biggest weaknesses is that I just plan everything at every time when I know I should not be planning things at every time, but I still do that. So anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, I know. You're clearly someone who, as like, I mean, look, I was reading all about you. I was like, God damn. You are, you persevere. You know, you're impressive for someone like, I don't personally like to put people in a bucket like, oh, you're really impressive for someone with a chronic illness. It's like, no, you're an impressive human being. And of course is an added, just this added level of difficulty when you're dealing with a chronic illness.
Definitely.
For sure. But yeah, like, I was really impressed. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff that I haven't even found because I looked you up in multiple different mediums and I saw new things each time. I was like, what? Where is the comprehensive list?
It's funny.
But yeah, I'm really glad you reached out. I think I feel like I maybe heard about you from someone else before you reached out to us. Like a while ago. Maybe it was related to Wellacopia, my company.
Oh, interesting.
You connected with someone there.
Maybe, yeah. Boy, when I was first starting Health Advocacy Summit, I think I reached out to almost everyone. So.
Oh yeah, well, everyone in the chronic illness space, right?
Yeah. Because like, especially being from Indiana too, there's just not like a lot of opportunities nearby. So it's like you really have to be like a lot more proactive because there's like a lot of geographic disparities with advocacy and stuff. So it's very different. But yeah.
That makes sense. Where are you in Indiana?
So I'm In Greenwood, which you probably haven't heard of, but it's like 30 minutes away from Indianapolis, and it's about an hour away from my college, which is IU Bloomington.
Cool. And so did you graduate? Are you graduating like now? What?
Yeah, like tomorrow, maybe. I'm not
Oh,
really sure. It's kind of an abstract graduation, of course, because like we're not going to have one for real. But I have to give a commencement speech for my college, um, like virtually, and I was supposed to do that May 1st, but obviously that hasn't happened, so I'm gonna do that tomorrow,
wow,
probably.
you're going to be a commencement speaker?
Yeah, yeah, which yeah will be hard for me to do virtually, but we'll see how it goes.
Hey, well, you've done a bunch of interviews. You now know what it's like to do something big virtually.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's gonna be like pre-recorded, so my parents are gonna record it, and then it'll just like be put out
Cool.
part of the video. So, but yeah.
Nice.
Anyway.
Have you seen John Krasinski's Some Good News?
Yes, I have. I've seen one episode of it. Yeah.
I haven't seen all of them either, but the last one I watched was about people graduating right now.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so sweet. If you haven't seen it, I absolutely recommend that you do.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's crazy. It was just so abrupt for all of us, and so it's like you don't really even have time to process that you're leaving college because it's like you were at college, now you're online, now you're at home. So it's like there hasn't been an in between. And I know so many people, particularly in the media field, that have lost their jobs or their internships, which is very, very hard because one of my majors is journalism. So, yeah, that's been like, yeah, it's been really sad to see because journalism obviously is very important right now, especially. So.
Yeah, I was actually thinking maybe it's because they're interns, but now would be a great time for people to
Right, right. Well,
do this.
unfortunately, it's because there's not enough funding. So it's like
Mm.
people, journalists, I mean, all these local news outlets are laying off a lot of journalists. So particularly here, it's scary because I mean, the local journalists are the ones that keep our local government accountable, especially in
It's
Indiana.
really good since our state by state government and then our national government, everyone's kind of contradicting each other. So
Right?
news is important right now. I remember it wasn't that long ago, like in mid-March, when everything started really falling down on us with the pandemic. My best friend actually got diagnosed with COVID relatively
Oh,
early when all this started happening. She's okay now,
yeah.
but she said she was getting calls from like the National Institute of Health and people in like in New York State Health, and they were all telling her different things to do.
I can imagine.
She was like, I don't know what to listen to.
Oh my gosh. I cannot imagine how scary and frustrating that must have been because that she must have been like right at the beginning of everything. So,
It's odd because it wasn't the beginning of the pandemic by any means, but it was the beginning of America really taking it seriously and shut
yeah.
doors. And yeah, I was actually in New York City for that entire, like, I was supposed to be there for all of March. It was just a random thing. My husband had a rotation there,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and so I'm so excited to go back home for for a month.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, the we got there March 1st, and New York City's first case was March 1st.
Wow. Oh no.
And I was like, "Ooh, this is about to get bad." Like,
Right.
seen the New York City subway? Who's your
Yeah.
doctor there, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, no, definitely. His name is Dr. Colin Bell. John Frederick Colin Bell. Yeah, he's he's definitely one of the more senior physicians there, and definitely ones that like are practicing not necessarily the old type of medicine, but the old type of way of communicating with patients.
Ah, gotcha. Well,
Like,
I'd really like to know more about. I
yeah,
mean, I'm all about communication and patient practitioner relationships. That's like my bread and butter.
yeah.
So, yeah, I'd actually like your input on that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because I grew up in Indiana, so like there where I grew up, it's very homogenous in terms of demographic, and so my pediatric gastroenterologist was completely dismissive of like culture when it comes to treating a patient, especially a pediatric patient, and how parents, because both my parents are immigrants, and so it was really interesting, like reflecting back on how he could have handled situations better, and how if he just understood culture a little bit more in communication with parents who necessarily were not born here, I think it would have been really, my care would have been very different, I think.
Mhm.
So it's
What
really
were,
fascinating. Yeah.
what were some examples of, I guess, hurdles you guys had to jump over for that?
Yeah, my dad is actually a doctor too, and my mom's a pharmacist. But with that being said, they both are still, they're very much, in line with Western medicine, but I think they still have a part of them that wants to believe in alternative medicine as a substitute for Western medicine in some situations. And one thing about Indian communities too, not to generalize, but it's kind of a trend, is that we tend to wait until the very last minute until surgery. So, I mean, I should have gotten surgery 5 years before I did, probably. So we waited like at the very, very last minute just because there's so much stigma. And it's not my parents' fault, like in any way, shape, or form, but just like the way that they've sort of been brought up and just the whole perceptions about surgery are very, very different. And I also feel like, my physician, my pediatric physician not being kind of dismissive of alternative treatments in respect to Western treatments kind of pushed my parents away a little bit more too. And of course, mental health is not addressed in Indian communities at all either. So that's been really, really tough, I think. And, I still struggle with my parents for them to understand. And they're getting a lot better. And my sister's like a huge advocate for me too. She's really awesome. But it took them until recognizing that there's actually a biological connection between the gut and the brain for them to really take mental health seriously. And so that's been really interesting. And they're the best parents ever. They're super, super supportive. I mean, yeah, but it's very different. And I didn't realize that until recently either. So,
Yeah, culture plays such a big role in how we experience our healthcare, uh,
mhm,
and and of course our parents.
mhm.
And you can have the most wonderful parents in the world, and it still not necessarily align with maybe what's best for you. I've definitely experienced that myself.
Yeah.
So, like I never like to throw my dad under the bus, but he
Yeah.
like amazing father, amazing father.
Yeah.
I still don't think he really believes that I have fibromyalgia and hypermobility syndrome. And he does, I mean, look, I've been in pain since I was 8. Like that's the first time I started really complaining about things.
Mhm,
And he gets that something's going on, but because he can't see it and there aren't real diagnostics
mhm.
for what I'm experiencing, he kind of like, what? No, I think you just want to be sick or something like that. He hasn't
Yeah.
said anything directly in a long time, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really tough. And I think it's sometimes denial on behalf of parents too. It's like they don't want you to be like this, or they don't want you to have to be like this. So they're trying to like get it out of your head, but it's not in your head. And that's something that I still struggle with too, is like both my parents they're very validating of my symptoms, but they're still very much in denial, and they've been in denial their whole lives. So, which like I can't even imagine having a child with a chronic illness. I mean, it's something to go through, but I mean, I get flustered even when my mom is just like normal people sick. So, yeah, it's
That
like,
that is a really great point actually that I don't think people talk about a lot when it's a loved one who maybe doesn't believe you or is giving you a hard time. If you think about it from their perspective,
yeah,
really hard for them to admit that something's wrong with their child, let's say. And parents tend to blame themselves, though they shouldn't. It's like, we were born this way or grew into it this way for X number of reasons, right?
yeah,
And really the best way they can help us is by being on our side, but
mm,
it's really tough. It is
right,
tough.
yeah,
And
no,
you
and I
have some like legitimate, I mean, not that mine are not legitimate, but
right,
you had surgery. There's something very visible, internally
yes.
about what you've experienced, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and in a way, like, I mean, I can't, I mean, I really empathize with fibromyalgia and ME, CFS. I think those are really tough because, I mean, it's a whole nother dimension of potential denial from parents and everything like that. And it's also, I mean, I think my parents don't admit this, but I think they really needed therapy while I was really sick. Because even so, once again, where I live in my community, there's not, I mean, it's very church centered, and there's not like a lot of support that my parents had locally. So I think it was just kind of them navigating this on their own, which was really tough for them. And I think that it made them feel a lot more regret internally, and a lot more like it was their fault. So I was born in West Virginia, and one of the things that my dad says is that, maybe if we didn't go to West Virginia, you wouldn't have had this or something like that, which he knows is kind of true, is not true, but it's still like a thing where he's always finding things that might have caused ulcerative colitis, even though we don't really know exactly the root cause of colitis.
So when were you diagnosed?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so quite early. And fortunately for me, my diagnosis journey was not like a year or 2 years. I was like diagnosed pretty fast. Because so when I was a little under 6 years old, my mom started finding blood in my stool, and I was had a lot of diarrhea. I had a lot of accidents. And of course, when you're 6, you're kind of past that phase, or you're supposed to be past that phase. And so my mom thought that she gave me too much ibuprofen because she's a pharmacist. So she was different things. She's like, maybe I did this, maybe I did that. But then I had recurrent symptoms, so she took me to the pediatrician, and then I was given an endoscopy and colonoscopy. And it's really funny because I was so excited that I was getting to miss school, and I was like getting all this special treatment, and I didn't know what was going on. And so it was like really kind of like a new thing in my life. And so um, I got the test results pretty fast, and then I got the diagnosis of colitis pretty much right away. Um, but and so then my entire journey started. I started, the excitement very quickly faded when I had to start taking a lot of medications. My diet changed. I started feeling a lot worse physically, and of course, like steroids, especially 40, 60 milligrams when you're 7, 8 years old is really tough on the body. And so I think that it's been quite a journey, but I've yeah, it's, and you never really learn how to live with the disease either. So it's like I've had it since I was 6, and I'm still trying to navigate every single social situation, and it doesn't really, you get more used to it and you accept it more, but it doesn't really get easier to have necessarily.
That's and I'm glad that you state that truth, because it's important to be optimistic, let's say, and see things in a positive light, but at the same time understanding that it's not like it's just going to be everything's going to be better one day.
Oh,
If things certain things can get better and you learn how to manage them, and I guess this is true for different illnesses. I'm talking really across the board here, uh but it is an ongoing journey, and frankly, this is personally how I feel about life. I love the ups and downs of life. Some downs really suck, but they make us really strong, um, and through each let's say, just I guess issue that we work through, allows us to work towards better and more important things going forward. And I think that you are a perfect example of someone who has done that. Um, there's a lot we could talk about in regards to what you have done for our community, both the like IBD community as well as just the chronic illness community. So, like, where should we start? Uh, well, I guess, can you tell us in what are what are you working on that you are most excited about these days? Let's start there.
Yeah. So definitely I'm most excited about and most passionate and energetic about Health Advocacy Summit. So Health Advocacy Summit is a nonprofit organization that facilitates advocacy events and year-long programming for young adults, adolescents and young adults with chronic and rare illnesses. So we have actual events, but then we have year-long programs that we do as well. And so we are gaining a lot of momentum with this, especially because I think society as a whole is recognizing this huge gap that we've forgotten. There's like pediatric advocacy, there's adult advocacy, but there's nothing for this time in between, which is often sometimes the most crucial time for development, socially, emotionally, and just figuring out kind of who you are at this time. And so I think it's been really fascinating that no intervention has really there's been very little intervention for patients in this kind of age demographic. And so we're really excited to be targeting this age demographic because we are young adults with chronic medical disabilities ourselves. So it's like, we're doing work for our peers, which is really exciting. And we're doing work with our peers, which is really exciting.
How do you define this age group, by the way?
Yeah, so this age group is very, very tough to define because chronic illness, can take a lot of years away from an individual. So, you might be 15, but you lost a few years to be, from being in isolation or something like that. So we've kind of indefinitely defined this term as young adults ages 13 to 30. And so we have a large age group because, for me, for example, I was in a form of isolation from middle school up until the middle of high school. And so, I was maybe 15 or 16, but developmentally I felt maybe 12 years old. So and I kind of had to catch up as soon as I got better and started having all these surgeries. So this age group is very difficult to define. And I think in general for people with chronic illnesses, age is a very, in a way, kind of a touchy subject too.
Yeah. I wouldn't have thought of it that way in terms of development, but yeah, that makes sense. Where do you think when you talk about sort of delayed development in that way, what specifically comes to mind?
Yeah. So, with delayed development for an individual who's been kind of really sick, especially throughout their childhood, I would say a huge factor is nutrition, the ability to grow, physically, of course, but I also think that mentally and emotionally, especially if you're in isolation or if you're not around people your age, you're not getting that same social interaction. You're not really getting the ability to navigate situations that your peers are navigating and the challenges that are really important to navigate as adolescents and young adults. You're not getting those experiences. You're getting a whole different side of being a young adult as a patient. So I think there's just a lot that an individual, especially a young adult patient, is missing out on as they're growing up. And there's so many other factors that are going to be in our ways, especially as we're aging. Things like jobs, navigating higher education, navigating just mental health, and of course, one of the biggest stressors, insurance in our healthcare system, which is not really been designed for young adults. I mean, 26 years old, you get kicked off your parents' private insurance or your parents' insurance in general. And so I think it's really tough because you're already in this stage where you're transitioning, and to have to deal with all these other external pressures is makes for a really difficult situation.
Yeah, quarter life crisis, it's a thing.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
You're 22?
I'm 21, actually. I'll be 22 soon, and on May 19th. And actually, fun fact, my birthday is on May 19th, which is also World Inflammatory Bowel Disease Day. So I got lucky there, I guess.
Well, happy almost birthday. That's very exciting.
I know, yeah.
Wow, and you're gonna be like commencement speaker and graduating and all this great stuff. Thanks for listening to another episode of the HumanCare podcast, part of the Invisible Not Broken podcast network. If you haven't already, please take the next 30 seconds to do these 3 things. Hit our subscribe button, leave feedback with a review, and share this episode with a loved one. Don't forget to check out our official Invisible Not Broken Network Facebook group. Please join us in our community conversations where you can ask questions, connect with fellow invisible illness peers, and make suggestions for the podcast. Visit facebook.com/groups/invisiblenotbroken. And this link will, of course, be in the show notes. Also, if you ever want to submit a question or suggestion directly, feel free to send an email to chronicillnesspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again for tuning in and being part of our mission to transform healthcare into human care.